Welcome to Curious Confessions, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Before we unravel tonight's eerie encounter, it would mean a lot to me if you light up that like button and subscribe. Because in this place, curiosity isn't just encouraged, it's essential. Ready to uncover the next confession? Let's begin. My name is Dr. Adrian Reinhardt, and I'm the last surviving member of the Kronos Project team under the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. You've never heard about me or the project because for all intents and purposes, we do not exist. But I'll be damned if NASA is going to let my colleagues' deaths be for nothing more than a classified folder collecting dust on a shelf. I know you probably won't believe me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just asking you to listen. The Kronos Project was secretly established in 1988 by NASA and headed by the Department of Defense. The goal was to use deep-range satellites and telescopes to search the far regions of space for signs of life beyond our solar system. What we found was something far worse. In 2004, a signal was detected from the Boötes Void, which is a vast span of nothingness in space nearly 1 billion light-years in diameter. And when I say there is nothing, I really mean nothing. The void contains absolutely no matter, or even dark matter. It's essentially a definitive null zone in the universe, devoid of anything, all except for a single continuous signal. I remember it like it was yesterday. My colleagues and I were sitting in a room that can best be described as a discount version of the Mission Control Facility in Houston. We were all there at our desks, going over sheets of useless data from other reconnaissance scans until the detection alarm started to go off, signifying that a signal had been detected from deep space. When we started going over the data, we triangulated the signal source to RA, 14 hours 50 minutes, 0 seconds. Deck plus 46 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. For those not versed in stellar coordinates, it pointed right smack dab in the middle of the void. Given the vast empty region of space, we at first had thought it was a system malfunction, but when we restarted it, it began immediately reporting a signal coming from those coordinates once again. We had originally thought we were just picking up fragments of a supernova or stellar burst of a long-dead star that had once been in that section of space. But that hypothesis was quickly uprooted when we were able to filter through the background data and convert it into an audio format. It wasn't one long wave of static that you would normally detect from such cosmic events. It was a continuation rhythmic series of beeps that sounded eerily like a heartbeat. Now, of course, we were miles away from actually confirming or denying that this signal was the work of some advanced alien civilization hiding away in the empty regions of space, but we were still absolutely ecstatic over the finding. I don't remember seeing a single one of the faces in there not smiling from ear to ear, while that beating, pulsing signal repeated itself over and over again through the speakers of the control center. Following our little eureka moment, we followed the proper procedures and contacted our administrators and awaited further instructions as we aimed every satellite and listening device we had at our disposal at those coordinates. I remember feeling like a kid on Christmas Eve as I was driving home that night, so impossibly eager to see what the next day would bring. Unfortunately, the days would roll into months, then into years, until the next chapter of the ongoing cosmic heartbeat signal would present itself. On August 24th, 2009, we were given the go-ahead by the Obama administration to send a reply signal into the same region of the void that the signal was still coming from. Although this was mainly done as a ceremonial milestone, given the fact that the region of space was nearly 700 million light-years away, it would at least be 1,400 million years for a reply to our message would even reach us. Given that the message was still a continuous repetition of 2 beats per second, we decided to use a similar frequency, using a more code translation of hello. We popped some champagne and enjoyed the event, as much as one could in a top-secret research facility under a shadow section of the United States government. That night at around 3 a.m., I received a call from Dr. Westcott concerning the signal. I'll never forget how disappointed and yet terrified his voice was over the phone. "The signal," he said. "It just stopped." For years, that seemed to be the end of our little interstellar communications, but we still carried on with our research, always keeping at least one monitoring device locked on the targeted coordinates of the void. We had a few detected bursts of information that piqued out interest at the time from other regions of space, but nothing like heartbeat signal. I wish I could tell you that's where the story ends. I wish I could say that rather than typing this out as the last few hours of my life ticked away, that I was back in the facility searching the stars. But these are the wishful thoughts of a man at the end of his rope. It's at this time I've come to the realization that there are no happy endings. 8 months ago, while going through a routine series of scans, we received yet another transmission from the Buddhist void. One I'm still trying to come to terms with, not because it began again, but because it defied the very laws of physics. The message translated from Morse code was, "Goodbye." It was a reply to the message we sent nearly 11 years ago. Somehow a communication that should have transpired over a course of 1,400 million years took place in just 11. It didn't make any sense. It still doesn't. None of what was happening made any logical sense, and that wasn't even the ridiculous part. As soon as the transmission was received and translated, the empty space around the center of the void began to expand as the surrounding star systems seemed to just blink out of existence. One by one, like a series of light bulbs being turned off, the stars began to go out. It was almost as if we were watching it occur in real time, which was another astronomical impossibility. You see, we can only observe as fast as light travels, which means if we were watching the Boötes void that is 700 million light years away, we would be seeing it as it was 700 million years ago. But now we were watching an event unfold that was absolutely cosmically impossible. The rate at which the stars were vanishing was expanding the void at a rate of nearly 5 million light years a minute. I don't know how to describe it other than saying that the dark nothingness was growing faster than the speed of light itself, seemingly consuming and extinguishing everything in its path. All the while, that message just kept ringing throughout the room. I don't know how or why, but very quickly the implications of this flooded over the control center as my colleagues and I began to realize the gravity of this impossible event. There was no argument amongst us whether this was possible or not. It clearly wasn't, yet it was happening all the same. At this rate, it will reach the solar system in a little under a year. Dr. Waterford sounded weak and hoarse. He exclaimed the obvious. We were all thinking the same thing. In a little under 360 days, this cosmic expanse would reach our very own star system. We of course didn't know what would happen when it did, but in astronomy, you always think of the worst. If the sun was somehow extinguished by the void as all the surrounding stars were, it would take a little under a year for the Earth to become an uninhabitable wasteland. That was, of course, even if the planet wasn't completely consumed and absorbed into nothingness as well. The entire time I ran the calculations and possible scenarios in my head, the message we received kept popping up again and again, seemingly trying to answer the question as to what was going to happen. Goodbye. It seemed to hit Dr. Redmond first as he leapt to his feet and made for a dashing sprint to the exit. Soon, everyone began to follow. Under normal circumstances, you'd think that the man's cheese had finally slid off his metaphorical crackers. But given the current situation, given what we were witnessing, he may have been the most sensible one in that entire room. Then, just as a few others were making their way towards the exit, it suddenly dawned on me as well. The message, it must have been telling us, and everything else in its path goodbye. Whatever was in the Buddhist void was coming for us. Coming for everything. At the time, we really weren't thinking of the consequences of our actions. We weren't focused on the repercussions of suddenly jumping ship and going AWOL from a top-secret government program. The only thing racing in our mind was the sweeping wall of nothingness hurtling towards us faster than the speed of light. I went straight home and drowned myself in a bottle, hoping to wake up the next morning to realize everything was just some crazy dream. I wouldn't be so lucky, of course. In truth, I would come to find that out very quickly. That night, at about 1 a.m., I was awoken by my phone. When I went to check the unknown caller, it turned out to be one of my colleagues, Dr. Maverick Burcham, who was one of the last men to even leave the facility that day. "You've got to run, Adrian," he yelled, trying to catch his breath. I had wondered at the time what had caused him such physical exertion. "Wow, what are you talking about?" I asked as my head pounded with a throbbing migraine. "They're scrubbing the project, cleaning house. Don't you know what that means?" That first sentence was all I needed to sober up. If what he said was true, then word had gotten up the chain of command, and they had now come to knowledge about both the discovery and its implications, as well as the science team's reaction to said implications. If they were scrubbing the project, then we would be the first to be cleaned up. "How do you know about this?" I asked him. I tried to go over to McGuire's house to discuss possible outcomes about the expansion, but when I got there, his house was burning to ashes, and Cuthbert and Lethbridge won't answer their phones. And on top of all that, I think I'm being followed. "Are you sure?" I asked as I made my way to the bedroom window, searching for any sign of government hitmen. "Yes, absolutely. I've driven around my block twice, and now I'm on 58 South. There's been a black unmarked car following me the entire way. I could almost make out what were sniffles through the speaker. Listen, you've got to get the hell out of Dodge right now while you've still got a pot to piss in. If you're half as smart as I know you are, then you'll..." Those were the last words I heard from him before the signal gave out. I didn't need much more of a warning after that. I quickly got some things together and piled up into my Avalon and hit the highway. I've been on the run ever since then, dodging any sign of suspicion by moving state to state, county to county. All until now. Once I post this, they'll obviously be able to trace it, and I'm going to let them. I've been running all year, and I'm tired of it. Mainly because there doesn't seem to be a point to it. Any longer, within a few months the Expanse will reach us anyway. So forgive me if I take the easy way out of this. I wish I could tell you in these final words that the governments of the world are working together to somehow try to stop this, but they know better. They know it's coming. And rather than be upfront with you, they want to hide it as long as possible. That's why there's been so much shit clogging the news and media here lately. They want total blanket coverage of so much chaos here on Earth. That way no one looks up to see the inevitable. It's coming, and there's no stopping it. So do me a favor, will you? Make what little life you have left worth it. Hold your loved ones. Go on that vacation you keep putting off. Do what makes you happy. Live. Goodbye. How does one comprehend the impossible, the truly impossible? But I suppose this would be the improbable, as this happened to me. This all happened a few weeks ago. I was living a perfectly boring life. But after that day, I can't even leave the house. I see it racing around my mind, but the image so clear, like it's standing there in front of me. I feel myself trapped in the moment, tortured by the memories that haunt me. I'm writing this as a warning, and in case nobody ever hears from me again, to act as a recant of what happened. Don't go into the woods. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon at the supermarket where I work. Stood behind the register, scanning people's stuff-glazed look in my eye, just waiting for something to happen. Until my best friend, out of respect for their families for the purpose of this story, I will be calling all my friends by their first initial. T calls me out of the blue and asks if I can take the next few days off from work to come camping with him. And some friends. I have some vacation days saved up, so I say I'll check with my manager. It wasn't unusual for T to call me up randomly. He's the free-spirited, rock climbing, hiking, surfboarding, Frickin' paragliding type that always has something they want to get you into. But as far as most of the things he's tried to get me into, camping's pretty tame. Of course, there was going to be a something else to it. T wasn't the type to do something so relaxing, but at the time, I didn't care. I just wanted a few days to hang out with my friends, drink some beers, have some BBQs, and just chill, if only I knew what I was in for. The place we arrived at was called Chopko Lake, apparently. T discovered it on his most recent hike into the mountains. It was a beautiful place. The water was crystal clear. You could see all the way to the bottom. The spruce trees that surrounded us were so thick that we were completely secluded. You could barely see 10 feet into the forest, a perfect place to relax for a few days. This was not a well-established trail. We were pretty off the beaten path, but still only around 3 miles from the road. We came here on and left the cars. I don't know how more people don't know about the place. We are completely alone. The other 3 friends that came with me, and T are E, J, and T's girlfriend L. I've known E and J since high school, but I've known T since I was a baby. We grew up across the road from each other and have been best friends since birth. But L I had only met twice. Once at a party. T and L were throwing as a meet my new girl thing, and the other was today. That being said, we all got on well. The first day was mainly just spent setting up camp, getting a fire pit established, and getting the food hung up in a tree away from camp. I was told by T and E that there were bears out here. I didn't know if they were messing with me, but I wasn't taking any chances. I'm just glad I brought my rifle with me. I was hoping to catch a deer while we were out here. While we were setting up E and J's tent, they weren't a couple, but we only had 3 tents, and nobody wanted to bunk with me because they have insomnia and keep them awake. Something felt weird, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. It wasn't anything inherently wrong. It was just odd, and I wasn't the only one that had noticed it. He had to. He didn't say anything, but I could see on his face he had noticed it too. After we got the tents up, we all sat around the fire drinking a couple of beers, and we had some sandwiches prepped by L before we left, so we didn't have to make food on the first night. She was nice like that. As I had been repeatedly told by T, we exchanged funny stories like the time J bet T he couldn't climb to the top of a lamppost, and he ended up falling onto J, and J remarked that the fire reminded him of E's ginger hair flowing in the wind. We all laughed. I still remember the sound of them laughing, but it was followed by the most horrific shriek ever. The sound was like no sound I have ever heard. It was like a child was being ripped limb from limb. Only the sound seemed to come from everywhere, all around us, in every direction. Needless to say, we all hurried to bed pretty quick after that. I sat in my tent all alone, rifle in hand all night, listening, looking for shadows. Nothing much happened though. As we woke the next morning, it was clear none of us had slept very much, if at all. The air was thick with fog, and the fire had burned right down to the embers. We got the fire going again and sat around the fire. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak up about last night, so we all just sat there in silence until T decided to be the one to speak. What the hell was that last night? One by one, they all jumped in. It must have been a mountain lion. They make a sound like that. What if someone was hurt last night? All good theories, but that's all they were. L tried to change the subject with breakfast. We all sort of agreed that we should. I think it was more to put our minds off it than actual hunger. We all headed out of camp to the tree where we hung the food, only to discover the remains of what used to be our food. The ground was littered with empty meat packets, burgers, steaks, ribs, all gone, but nothing else. T said it must have been a bear, and I said, if it was a bear, they would have eaten everything, not just the meat. And even if they had, why hadn't any of the other scavengers come to eat what's left? That's when it hit me what was wrong with this place. What was making the hair stand up on the back of my neck the other day? It was the sound. There wasn't any. No insect sound, no bird song, nothing, just the noise of the trees blowing in the wind. We beelined it back to camp as quickly as possible, the safety of our camp. What felt like an impenetrable fortress compared to being out in the forest. The day progressed onward. We were all frightened and ready to go home. We all collectively agreed to leave this afternoon, so we started tearing down camp. We were almost ready to go when we hear the sound of E screaming for help. But we all turn around to see where it was coming from, and Jay said he just went into the wood to take a leak before we left. We all run into the woods, me armed with my rifle, T with a pistol he bought to fend off bears. It wasn't until we got deeper into the forest that we realized that the scream was almost monotone, like there was no emotion behind the screams of what seemed like excruciating pain. At this point, the sun was starting to set, and through the thick tree canopy, it looked like night. We kept walking through the forest, but we never seemed to get any closer. It had been going on for around 20 minutes at this point. No matter how much we walked, we never got any closer to the source of the noise. We all eventually came to a clearing in the forest. There was something familiar about it. The trees, the lake. It was our camp. Well, since we cleared everything, it was just a clearing now with a fire pit in the center. How did the screams lead us back to where we started? And more importantly, why? I approached the fire pit and its old burnt-out coals. As I kneeled by it, there was something I caught in the corner of my eye. It was E's body dangling, but not hung from a tree. He was being held by his feet by that impossible thing. E's body was torn to shreds. He had large gashes down his front. The blood that oozed from the gashes was the deepest color of red I had ever seen. It turned his ginger hair a dark shade of orange. He died screaming in pain, the expression etched into his face. The creature that stood holding my friend's lifeless body in his hand truly was an awful thing. It stood at around 8 feet tall. Its body was a pale, almost white, but not quite. It had large claws on both its hands and feet. It had a thin, almost emaciated body, but large, rotund gut. Its eyes were sunken and black. They were the darkest black I had ever seen, like see into the depths of your soul. Black and a thin, crooked smile with blood dripping. It dropped his body and sprinted at inhuman speed right at me. Luckily, T had the good sense to fire at it before it got to me. He hit it in the leg, and it let out a blood-curdling scream in the voice of our recently departed friend. The blood that dripped wasn't red, but pure black. It turned to T and hit him so hard he flew into the trees and got impaled on a branch. The thud rang out amongst the silent trees. No scream, no nothing, just that thud echoing. It seemed to go on forever. Then a scream like a woman dying from the creature's still closed, smiling mouth. L screamed like a mother who had lost her child. The creature chose her next. It moved towards her with impossible speed, picked her up by her head, and looked at her in the eyes still smiling, and ripped her in half, showering. The grass turning the beautiful fields of grass into seas of red. She was left crawling on the floor, dragging her torso, leaving behind a trail of blood as she tried to move away, screaming in pain. I was stunned. It had all happened so fast, I didn't know what to do. Just laid there with a horrified look on my face, so shocked I could do nothing but look on in fear as it slaughtered my friends. The monster, for some reason, decided that it was time to run off. It climbed the tree that had T's body in it and drug his limp body off into the forest, just as the sun fell beneath the horizon and it turned to night. It moved so quick I could barely track it with my eyes. As I watched it take my friend into the night, I turned to the only other remaining member of the group, Jay. He was in the floor in the fetal position, crying. I picked him up and dusted him off. I looked right in his eyes, wrapped my hand round the back of his neck, and pulled him in as tight as I could. After what seemed like a long time, he pulled back and said, "What are we going to do?" I had no answer for him. This wasn't some movie where I stand up in defiance and say, "We're gonna kill that thing." I was so scared I could barely stand. My legs were shaking so badly. All I knew was I didn't want to die in this field. We decided the only way out of this was to make a run through the woods to the car. At least then we could get out of here and get help. It was only 3 miles, but 3 miles through the woods in the direction that the monster ran off in. Slowly trudging our way through the forest on high alert, rifle aimed up in the trees looking for the slightest sign of movement. As we moved gingerly, there was a sound of leaves rustling behind us. Then on the left, in front, right, it's encircling us. We just keep moving forward, eventually developing into a sprint. Why hasn't it attacked yet? At first, I thought it was because it was trying to split us up, but we've kept moving, and the same thing is happening, right? Behind, left, front, nothing. It wasn't until we were around half a mile away that the sound just stopped. Not the sound of it running, but everything, the sound of the wind in the trees, even the bird and insect noises that came back around a mile back. Nothing. Then everything came back all at once when it attacked. I managed to pull Jay forward far enough that it missed a killing blow, but it still took out his ankle. The foot was practically severed. He screamed in pain. He was bleeding out and fast. I grabbed him over my shoulder and carried him as far as I could. I don't know how. But we made it back out the clearing just off the road where we left the cars. I pulled out my keys and placed Jay on the ground while I unlocked the car. I look at his face, and he was pale as a ghost, hardly able to move. I turned to unlock the car. It must have been 2 seconds at the most. I turned back, and then it was standing at the tree line, watching. I don't know why, but it never crossed the tree line. It just stood and watched, waiting for us to pass back over, not shouting or screaming, just watching it. Almost looked scared, looking around at the outside world until it ran back into the forest. I loaded Jay into the car. I pulled off as fast as I could, and I pulled into the closest hospital I could find and unloaded him, yelling for help. He had bled out on the back seat as we drove through the night. I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did with that wound. I looked on in as they loaded him onto a gurney to take him to the morgue. I sat a lump on the floor watching as they wheeled away my last remaining friend. Of course, the police were called to investigate, but they found no evidence that I had any involvement in the killing of my friends. Obviously, I tried to warn them about the monster, but they found no evidence of that either. Not that I think they believed me anyway. They got chalked up as some psycho out in the woods killing people. There's still a manhunt out looking for him, but they won't find anything. So this is my warning to anyone willing to listen. Don't go into the woods. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door, when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, like I said, but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of Oj in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason at that moment I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her or even yell after her. I just stood there frozen in shock, wondering what fuck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again, from over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that," I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking, and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home, and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was fucking terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you. But joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck, Lynn? I snapped. This shit is getting really fucking annoying. I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk. But instead, I heard a faint moan. So quiet, I wondered if I heard it at all. And then complete silence. Lynn, I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear to God, just fucking stop it, I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared. Too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a fucking lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers, and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling, almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now." She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from her place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her. Give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled. Like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation. But if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully, I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry, because it's not my place. But is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know. She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said. Ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. Number, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. Number. She looked awful though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believed she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me, that she was being creepy. As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting. But this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong, dangerous even, like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away, so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. "Yes," she answered, already sounding irritated. "Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment." "What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said, coolly. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something..." I was quickly interrupted. "It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is that you want from me?" she asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. "I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues," I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking, or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind," she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. "Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well," I said, my frustration evident in my voice. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me," she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. "Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn." I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. "Marianne, what's wrong?" I started. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. "Seek professional help." She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that. As if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter. How she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets, like he was going on a fucking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here, shit?" Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the fuck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head, but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction, but fuck me, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go. He called from the hall. I'm getting nauseous. All right. I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue and I couldn't help but gag. "Who the fuck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that?" Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a fucking exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any—" His words died in his throat and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making. A sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes, and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements, as if she were nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run! Go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move because a second later, I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search. But of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you," and a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. If you'd driven past it, you would have assumed some old-timer on a pension was just moldering away his golden years there, and you would have been right in some ways. Where he showed his wealth was in his generosity. Grandpa liked to give. He gave the best Christmas presents, had the best candy for Halloween, donated to charities, and liked to see people happy. If you asked him how he could afford to be so generous, however, he would always just wink and say he had his way. Not even my grandmother knew where his money came from, and they were married for 50 years. So when he died, we all wondered who would inherit his mysterious fortune. My cousins had loved Grandpa. Grandkids always do, but the 2 of us had always been close. My old man hadn't even waited till I was born to go grab some milk and cigarettes, and Grandma and Grandpa had helped my mom raise me so she could go to work. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting with my grandpa and watching TV, taking walks around the neighborhood, and eating ice cream at this little shop on the corner. He would always tell me to appreciate the little things, because the smallest thing could be the one that changes my life the most. "Take this," he would say, showing me the door knocker he often carried in his pocket. I found this when I was a very young man, sifting through trash in a landfill as I looked for bottles to sell. It became my lucky charm, and it changed my life forever. Grandpa carried that door knocker for as long as I had known him, and it was pretty unique. It was a brass hand holding an apple, and it was all meticulously crafted in exhausting detail. The fingers had individual nails, the apple had a stem and leaves, and even the knuckles had wrinkles on them had been carefully worked. I couldn't believe as a young child that Grandpa had just pulled this out of a dump, but he carried it everywhere, and I suppose it did bring him luck. The funeral was beautiful, everyone there having nothing but kind words for Grandpa and his family. After the service, my 3 cousins and I were asked to come to a will reading at the lawyer's office, and Grandpa had been as generous in death as he was in life. My cousins had received a trust fund for each of them, the amount payable on their 30th birthday, with a small living expense each month. Grandpa hadn't left a trust for me, but he had left me his little house, which I was pretty glad for. Mom had recently married, and though I liked Mike a lot, it had seemed a little weird to have her adult son living in the house she was trying to make a new life in. Grandpa's old house was the perfect size for me, a college student with no real prospects of marriage in the near future. It was close enough to campus that I thought it would be ideal, but the lawyer had one more thing to give me. "Your grandfather was also very clear that I give you this," he said, handing me Grandpa's lucky charm, the brass door knocker. I thanked him, thinking I might hang it somewhere in the house in Grandpa's memory. It seemed only fitting to make a little memorial wall out of it. After all, Grandpa had loved the thing, and it had been his only constant possession for years. So, I moved in that day, taking my things and wishing my mom and stepdad goodbye as I too embarked on a new life. Over the next few days, I changed the house around a little. I hung my flat screen on the wall. I moved Grandpa's favorite chair around. I added my books to his bookshelf, and I donated his clothes and some of his other things to one of his favorite charities in town. I think Gramps would like the thought that his stuff would help people in need, and they were very thankful. A few of them offered condolences, having read about his death in the paper. Grandpa bought a lot of his stuff from Goodwill and Habitat for Humanity, but he also donated a lot, so he was well known to them. It was Friday, about 4 days after the funeral, when I noticed the knocker on the counter and remembered my plans to hang it and make a memorial wall. I didn't have anything else planned for that day, so it seemed like a fine pursuit. I hung the knocker in the living room, putting it above a little shelf where I put some candles and a picture of Granddad. I put his wallet up there too, something else he was never without, and I added a tin of Altoids, a pocket watch I had seen him wear, and a few other pictures of him. The door knocker was the centerpiece, and it all looked very nice when I got done. As I finished, I stepped back and admired it, thinking that Grandpa would have liked it too. That night was the first time I heard the knocking. I was lying in bed, doing some doom scrolling before I went to sleep, when suddenly I heard a loud thump from the living room. I took out my earbud and listened, wondering if something had fallen over, or maybe someone was at the door. But I didn't hear anything. I shrugged, thinking it had been my imagination, but just before I could slip the earbud back in, I heard it again. 3 long booms from the living room, and then silence. I got up, wondering who would be knocking on my door at this time of night. I went to the front door and looked out the peephole. I opened the door to see if someone was joking around, but there was no one there. The front porch was empty, and Grandpa didn't have bushes or anything to hide behind. The kid, or whoever, would have to be the freaking Flash to make it off the porch without being seen, and I closed the door and started to go back to bed. I had come to the hallway that led there when I heard it again. 3 long booms, and then silence. I turned back, looking at the door, but there was nothing. The knocking hadn't come from the door, I would have been able to tell. No, it had come from the living room. I glanced around, looking for someone at a window, or maybe the rattle of a woodpecker on the eaves, but there was nothing. I decided to just go to bed and try to make sense of it later, but that wasn't the last time I heard it. I heard the knocking a couple of times over the weekend, but I could never quite nail down where it was coming from. It was always either 1, 2, or 3 knocks, followed by a 10-second pause, and then the same number of knocks before it stopped. By Monday, I was pulling my hair out, wondering if it was the pipes or something in the walls, and then finally I caught it. I had found a wedding picture of my grandparents sitting in a desk drawer, something Grandpa had probably put away so he wouldn't miss her, and decided it would look better on the shelf with his other memories. I was adding the wedding picture beside one of Gramps accepting an award for philanthropy when the knocker on the wall suddenly rattled and thumped. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, but it thumped once, twice, 3 times, and was quiet for about 10 seconds. I had just thought it might be a fluke or something when it did it again. Thump, 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 and then silence. I took it off the wall and looked for some kind of motor or something, but it was just a normal brass knocker. It happened 2 more times that day, and I was extremely curious as to what made it do it and why. I started going through Grandpa's desk, hoping for some explanation, and that's when I found the letter. It was in the middle of a ledger book, addressed to me, and it wasn't even sealed, which was unlike Gramps. It was just a single page of notebook paper, and I was glad to see Grandpa's cramped handwriting speaking to me from the page. I hope you're enjoying the house, and I hope you found this letter in a timely manner. I'd considered leaving it to Wilson to give to you, but I thought it might be better if you came across it naturally. Also, I wanted you to receive the knocker, and Wilson may have decided to keep it if he'd read the letter. He's a good man, an honest man, but greed can do funny things to people. You have probably noticed by now that the door knocker taps on its own sometimes. You wouldn't believe how I discovered its power, a complete accident, but I swear that what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The door knocker opens doors to different places. Place it on a door and wait for the knocks. Once it knocks, open the door and travel to where it takes you. The knocker only has 3 destinations, but they have been of great benefit to me and our family. When it knocks, you will have 10 seconds to open the door. The second set of knocks is the doorway closing, so it won't work if you catch it on the second set. 1 knock opens onto the treasury, a room of treasures. Coins, gems, gold, all piled to the ceiling. If anything guards it, it has never bothered me, but I'm always careful not to take too much. 2 knocks opens onto the library, a room stuffed with bookshelves. You can spend hours, days even, in this place, and time won't pass outside the door. I have learned so many things here, things lost to time, and read about things that have yet to happen. 3 knocks opens onto a void, a darkness that I dare not enter. Anything you put in here will be gone, anything. There is no ground inside it, though, so don't walk in. I'm ashamed to say that it's where I've been putting my trash, but it's also where I hid your dog, the one I said ran away when you were very young. He died suddenly, just lay over and died, and I put him in before you woke up from your nap. I'm sorry I never told you, but you were so young when it happened that I didn't think you would mourn him for long. The knocks are never consistent, but each knock seems to come at least once a day. The 3 knocks usually come in the evening or early afternoon. 1 knock is usually in the morning or before noon, and the 2 knocks comes when it will. While you are inside, don't let the door close. I was stuck in the library for a long time once, and was fortunate that your uncle came along and opened the door. Time doesn't affect people the same way inside the door as it does here, so spend as much time as you want there. If you get hurt, however, you will still be injured, so be careful. You and I have always been close, and I know you and your cousins have speculated for years about my mysterious fortune. The knocker is yours to do with what you will, but always remember that money breeds difficulty, which is why I have always kept it a secret. Good luck. I love you, kiddo. I read through the note a few times, trying to make sense of it. There was no way. Grandpa had always been sharp, not real problems mentally, but this sounded like the mad ramblings of a lunatic. The knocker, however, had moved on its own. That much was true. It occurred to me that there was a way to test the rest of it, so I decided to do just that. I took the knocker off the wall where I had hung it and attached it to the closet door in the living room. It looked a little silly there, a door knocker on a door that opened onto a closet with 2 coats and a bunch of board games in it. But I wanted to be sure. It was silly, the kind of thing you read about in fairy tales, but I wanted to be sure. I had a while to wait, but it finally happened just as I was thinking of going to bed. It was around 10:30, and I was reaching for the remote to turn the TV off when I heard it. 2 loud knocks, seconds apart, on the closet door. I popped up, remembering I had 10 seconds to get there, and threw the door open. I expected to find the same closet that he had been there earlier. I expected this to be a joke from my grandfather. What I didn't expect to find the great library he had talked about on the other side. It was huge, a library to rival any I had ever seen, and the windows shone with perfect sunlight as I stood in shock. The shelves were tall, taller than the roof of the house I stood in, and they had long, trestled ladders with wheels to slide along the floor. I could see a grand staircase, and I felt sure there would be levels above the next as well. I could learn anything in there. I could learn everything in there. But I remembered what Grandpa had said about not getting closed inside and looked for something to prop the door open with. I saw an end table and pulled it over to put in the way, stepping inside and marveling at the space. I spent hours perusing books. There were books on languages, on history, on science, on anything I would want to know. I only explored the first floor that night, but there was enough here to keep me reading for days, maybe months. I was studying architecture at college, and there was a whole section of books I could use to study any period, any style, and anything else I wanted. This place was like the library they talked about in Alexandria, the library in the Harry Potter books, and some kind of wizard's private collection from a fantasy novel, all rolled into one. Time may have moved differently here, but it didn't stop me from getting tired. I had been excited when I came in, but after a couple of hours of looking at books, I was yawning and rubbing my eyes. I decided to come back another time and let the door close as I pushed the end table out of the way. It was true. I couldn't believe it, but I had seen it myself. Grandpa had a magic door knocker. I spent the next few days testing each knock pattern, and Grandpa's observations had been spot on. I found the room with the gold in it the next day, and it was almost more impressive than the library. Think of a room full of any kind of money you could want. Gold bars, US currency, ancient denarii, little stones with things scratched on them, gems, pearls, silver nuggets, and other things I didn't have names for. I reached for a stack of hundreds with shaky hands and brought them out before letting the door close again. I had made about $2,000 in a matter of seconds, and I put it somewhere safe before heading to class. The void was a little scarier when I got it, but I had been setting garbage bags beside the door in case I was home when the knock came. The void was just what it claimed to be. It was like looking out at the night sky, except there were no stars. It was an inky, unnatural blackness, and I wondered if maybe Nietzsche had been describing this place when he talked about staring into the abyss. The space was utterly devoid of anything, but it seemed to crouch as well, just waiting for me to drop my guard. The bags went in, falling into a soundless, airless void before I closed the door again. It was great for a while, truly a blessing. I had all the money I needed, and whatever I took seemed to come back after I shut the door. I could take books from the library if I needed to, and anything I left on the work tables would put itself back on the shelf. I spent a lot of time in the library when I could get there, and sometimes I would wake up to find I had fallen asleep. The door never slammed shut and trapped me in there, and without anyone to come behind me and accidentally close it, I felt safe in there. I learned so much in a relatively short time, and my professors were impressed with my knowledge. I considered bringing them the books I used to gain this knowledge, but thought better of it. How would I explain it to them? A guy in his early 20s, who just happened to have a book that was probably hundreds of years old, was something that would probably gain the attention of the wrong sort of people. I was careful not to use too much of the money, careful not to spread it around too much, and careful not to show anyone the books from the library. It went well for about 4 months, but then I started getting knocks of another sort from the door. It started subtly, with little knocks and taps from time to time. I'm sure I missed a lot of them, but I would sometimes look up if I was watching TV or something, expecting to see the knocker tapping but find it silent. I started watching the door closer, seeing strange lights waft beneath it sometimes. They would skitter across the bottom, like strange shadows, and I found myself watching them more than the TV after a while. My trips to the other places were still uneventful, the landscapes the same as they had always been, but it was the times in between the knocks that I came to dread. Then, one night, something knocked back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a familiar boom sound 3 times. I checked the clock and saw it was nearly 11, a little late for knocking, but I stuck my head out to look at the door, nonetheless. The toothbrush was still half in my mouth, and I had expected to see nothing stranger than the knocker fall back into place. Instead, something knocked again, and it wasn't the knocker. I came slowly out of the bathroom, watching as strange lights came flashing from between the cracks in the door. It was like a haunted house attraction, and I almost expected to see smoke billowing out from underneath it. The knocks were shy, almost uncertain, and I was preparing to head to my room when something hit the door hard enough to shake it in the frame. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, and when it hit it again, I fell onto my butt and just watched it shake. Whatever was knocking was adamant about getting in, and it slammed its weight into the door again and again. The knob rattled, the door shook, and the lights flashed faster and angrier. My teeth were chattering. This had never happened before, and I was terrified that whatever it was might get through. It slammed into it again, the old wooden door cracking in the frame, and when it struck this time, I saw something break through the surface and come grabbing blindly from within. It was an arm, a long purple arm covered in scales. It thrashed around, trying to find something to grab, and the sounds from within were like bats and birds turned up to 1,000. It shivered right on the edge of hearing, and I expected my ears to start bleeding. It was looking for the knob, and I wasn't sure what would happen if it found it. Instead, it bumped into the knocker. It fell off the door. It was only held on by a couple of screws, and as it clattered onto the floor, the most hellish sound of all ripped from the hole before being cut off as suddenly as it had begun. The lights, the noise, and the banging all stopped with a suddenness that made me dizzy. I stood up, looking at the broken door, and walked slowly into the living room to see the extent of the damage. Something was bumping, but I thought maybe the arm had knocked something over. I wanted to make sure the knocker was okay, but as I came around Grandpa's old chair, I saw what was making all the noise. It was the arm that had come through the door. It was leaking black fluid all over the hardwood and flopping around like a fish. It didn't flop for long, but now I'm left with a problem. The portal only seems to open when the knocker is up, but unless it's up, I can't open it. I wonder if this is why my grandpa kept it with him so often. Did he, perhaps, have a visitor one night when he least expected it? For now, I'm keeping the knocker in my bedside table, but even as I lay here writing this, I can hear it bump against the wood every now and again. The money will eventually run out. That, or my curiosity to learn, will get the better of me, and I'll hang the knocker again. But I think for now, I'll let it sit. No need to invite trouble if I don't have to. "You're gonna give me $100 to sit inside this cardboard box for 2 minutes?" I asked, feeling the booze slosh around my brain. "It's that simple," the street performer said with a cocksure grin. "You last 2 minutes inside the box, you get $100. "What if I don't make it 2 minutes?" "You don't get $100. "What's inside the box?" The street performer opened the top of the large refrigerator box, and true to his word, it was empty. "So what's the catch?" my friend Paul said. "There's always a catch." "No catch. You go in of your own free will. You get out of your own free will. You put 2 minutes between those moments, you get $100. "Let me see the money," I said. The street performer didn't look like he had a spare franklin to part with. He wore a stained, threadbare suit with patches on the elbows and tearing at the sleeves. A Atop his head was a busted top hat that looked like it had survived since the Great Depression. His feet were covered in mismatched, filthy docksiders that looked like they'd been hauled up from some mucky swamp. That said, the street performer pulled a crisp and clean $100 bill from under his hat. I feel like if I go in, you're gonna kick the box or pour old soup on me or some other stupid shit for one of those dumbass TikTok pranks. Old soup? I asked, chuckling. Paul laughed. I don't know, man. Old-ass clam chowder or something. The street performer shook his head. No, sir. I'm not a fan of chowder or pranks, and I don't have any idea what a TikTok is. I'm just an honest man looking to give away $100 to the bravest and boldest among you. That's definitely not you, Paul, I said, laughing. Fuck off, bro, Paul said. You gonna do it? I asked. Why don't you do it? He shot back. Not bold enough. Not really. Plus, if I sit down on the ground, I may not be able to get back up. I think I shouldn't have had that last drink. I'm gonna call that Uber. Your name's Paul, correct? The street performer asked my friend. Yeah. Paul, let me ask you this. Could you use $100? Hell yeah, especially after what I spent tonight. Big brave man like you couldn't be afraid of a simple cardboard box. Fuck no, I'm not. Do you have 2 minutes to spare? How long until the Uber gets here? Paul asked me. 5 minutes, I said. Give or take. Paul looked at the box and back to the street performer before glancing at me. What do you think? Is it worth it? Man, I don't know. I didn't. The alcohol was not only on top of me, but was beating my temples with rock hammers. I mean, the whole thing is fucking weird, but he hasn't explained a downside. I haven't informed you of any downsides because there isn't one, the street performer said with a wink. This guerrilla marketing for a box company, or do you work for Frigidaire? I asked. No, sir. I work for me, myself, and I, the street performer said. Nobody likes having a boss, am I right? Especially if you knew my boss, I said. He makes Attila the Hun look like Daffy Duck. Fuck it, man, Paul said suddenly. I'll do it. Wonderful, the street performer said. Only, Paul added, looking at me, if we can go to the titty bar after I get out. Bro, I am beat, I said, yawning. I don't have the energy. You don't have enough energy to look at boobs. No, I said, surprising myself. I might pass out in the Uber. If you're gonna throw up in the alley, Paul said. They charge extra if they have to clean up any bodily fluids. Maybe I'll puke in the box before you get in. Please don't vomit inside the box, the street performer said. It's one of a kind. These things come off an assembly line, Paul said. Hardly one of a kind. I glanced at my phone, let my vision refocus, and noticed the Uber's arrival time. You got 3 minutes, dude. You going in or not? Fuck it, let's do it. Who keeps time? Time keeps itself. However, I have a pocket watch to assist us, the street performer said, pulling out a beat-up brass pocket watch from inside his suit jacket. Climb in now. I'll count you down. Paul opened the top flaps and placed one foot inside. He was unsteady on his drunk legs, and I started laughing at his teetering. H flipped me off, steadied himself, and placed the second leg inside. He sat down, shot me a shit-eating grin, and said, I want to go to Golden Apples after. That girl Janine is there this weekend. She's not into you, I said. Yet, he said with a smile before grabbing the flaps and closing himself in the box. Your time starts in 3, 2, 1, the street performer said, watching the second hand on his watch spin past 12. Go! Paul sat there for a minute before he started chuckling. I couldn't help but join in. What even was this? In a million years, I'd never be able to guess that this is where the night would end, inside a cardboard box. You start by having a few too many cheap domestics during a ball game, and end up probably being hustled by an unhoused guy in a top hat. This is so fucking stupid, I said, barely holding back laughter. They said the same thing about the dog launched into space. Hey, Laika, how dark is it up there? I asked. Not very, Paul said, his voice muffled by the cardboard. He started a giggle fit again before adding, I feel like a dumbass. If the shoe fits, I said. The box suddenly jostled violently. It went still for a beat before rocking back and forth again. From inside the box, I could hear Paul moving and adjusting. Bro, stop moving, I said. I'm not doing that, he said. 30 seconds, the street performer yelled out. Wait a second. It just got dark, really dark. You can't see the neon light from the bar? No, he said, his voice unsure. Wait, there's some kind of white light off in the distance. The distance? I asked, confused. You're inside a box. The farthest distance is a foot away. Hey, Mr. Top Hat, is there a screen hidden in here? Like a TV screen or something? The street performer ignored him. What's going on? I asked. There's something approaching the box. Yeah, the Uber, I said with a drunken laugh. Like there is someone walking toward the inside of the box, Paul said. It looks like a person, but that doesn't make any sense. His voice went from playful drunk to concerned drunk. He was sloshed, but a small part of his brain was still on guard. It told him there was danger around him. But it didn't make any sense, as he was sitting inside a cardboard box on the sidewalk of an empty street. 45 seconds. Paul, stop fucking around. Bro, I'm serious, he said. Some guy, I think it's a guy anyway, is walking toward me. Wait. Oh shit. There are 3, 4. I'm surrounded by shadow figures. Shadow figures, I asked. They look like people, but different. You fucking with me? There aren't any features that I can see. They look like silhouettes. Dude, stop. The joke's not funny anymore. Get out, huh? The Uber is almost here anyway. Shh, he hissed. I think they can hear your voice. I turned to the street performer. What's going on here? What's the gag? He ignored me. His eyes stayed trained on the pocket watch's quickly rotating second hand. 1 minute, halfway there, he yelled. I can hear them speaking. It's faint, but what? It doesn't sound like any language I've ever heard. Paul, enough's enough. Come on out, man. Our ride is turning down the street. Oh fuck, I think they saw me, he said, his voice quivering. Who's they? These shadow figures. Oh fuck, he said, fear lacing his words. I heard him start kicking the side of the box from the inside. The cardboard bent with each kick, but never broke. Get moving, I said. I'm trying to run, but my body isn't moving. Dude, you're kicking the box, I said. That's not me. My body is frozen, and they're coming. Holy shit. Get out of the box, Paul. 1 minute 30 seconds, the street performer yelled. Best time of the night. One of them is coming for me, Paul said in a panic. Oh God, they have eyes, but not like ours. His eyes, I can see. Paul trailed off. You can see what? Everything, he said. They're showing me everything. 1 minute 40. The money is as good as yours, stranger. There's fire. It's everywhere. The ground is sizzling. I can feel the heat. It's burning me through my pants. Ah, fuck, what is this? Get out of the box now, Paul. The other 3 are closing in. Their eyes are glowing white. I can see the ends of the earth, the end of the sky, the end of it all. The fires, they burn. Oh God, they burn. Then Paul started screaming. Not, I stubbed my toe, screams, but I'm being murdered, and the only person who'll ever hear this is my killer, screams. Open the box, I yelled at the street performer. Right fucking now! But he didn't move an inch. He kept his eyes trained on his watch. 10 seconds remaining, the street performer yelled. 10. I leaned over and tried to rip open the flaps on top of the box, but they weren't moving. They felt like 1,000 pounds, and I couldn't budge them. I slammed my hand down on the cardboard, and it felt like I had just hit concrete. My hand throbbed, but I tried again to rip the box open to no avail. "Push up, Paul," I screamed at the top of the box. "Listen to my voice and come for it." 9, 8, 7. "Why are you all showing me this?" Paul said through sobs. "I don't want to watch them all die." "Paul, sit up. Come on, man, sit up." 6, 5, 4. The box was jostling back and forth, being shaken by unseen forces. It jumped an inch off the ground and rocked around like bored kids beat it with bats. "I'm watching them tear me apart," Paul said with a whimper. Whoa, I'm above them now. I'm being pulled away, but I can see my body. There's so much blood, so much fire. "Get out." "What's pulling me into the air?" Paul asked, his voice sounding distant. 3. "Paul, I'm coming." I threw my whole body at the box, trying to knock it on its side. I hoped to see Paul come tumbling out. But when I hit the cardboard, it didn't move an inch. It clanged like it was made from pure steel. I braced myself on the ground and kicked the side of the box with all my might, and instantly felt a lightning bolt of pain rush my leg up and spine. There was nothing I could do. 2. I'm so high. I can see it. I can see the... Oh my God. No, it can't be. No, Paul screamed, and it sounded like it was falling now. Oh shit. The ground. It's opening. From the sidewalk, I looked up at the street performer with hate in my eyes and yelled, "Let him go, you fuck! Open the box! I'm falling through the world! How? Oh no! Oh God! Oh God! Please let me go!" 1, and time! The street performer yelled, raising his hands in victory. The box went still. "Paul! You won!" the street performer exclaimed triumphantly. "The first of the night!" He calmly tucked his pocket watch back into his jacket pocket. He replaced it with a small, dollar store confetti popper. He gently yanked the string of the popper and blasted bits of colorful paper and glitter into the air. It landed all around me. I lunged at the box and tried to rip open the top again. This time the flaps moved as easily as expected. But when I pulled them back, Paul wasn't inside. Not a trace of him. The only thing I found was a crisp, new $100 bill. Paul, what the fuck? Where are you?" "He's left the box," the street performer said. "His 2 minutes were up." I leaped onto my feet, ready to beat the street performer to a pulp. But when I glanced at where he had been standing, he was gone. I hadn't heard him run away or catch a cab or anything. Like Paul, there was no trace of him. It was like he'd never been there. From behind me, I heard a car downshift and come to a stop on the curb. There was the familiar whine of an electric window being rolled down, followed by a monotonous voice calling out my name. My Uber had arrived. I looked to where the box was, and it was gone too. All that was left was the $100 bill. "You still want your ride?" my driver said. "Did you see anyone with me?" "No," he said. "There wasn't a man in a busted top hat and a large refrigerator box standing here as you came down the street." "I think you made a good decision calling an Uber," my driver deadpanned, adding, "If you puke in my car, there is a cleaning fee. So, if you're gonna yak, just do it now, huh?" I felt my legs go weak. I didn't know what to do. My friend was gone, and the man who sent him away had vanished. I didn't even know what to say to the police. Ugh. My friend climbed into a cardboard box and disappeared. No, I'm not drunk anymore. "You coming or what? This is my busy time." I looked down at the $100 bill, and something caught my eye. Instead of Benjamin Franklin's face staring back at me, Someone had scrawled a note. I picked up the note and held it close to my face. I'd know that handwriting anywhere. It was Paul's. The note read, "I've seen the end. You don't make it." "Buddy, you coming?" my driver asked. "Yeah," I said. I'm coming." That was several hours ago. I've been sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the $100 bill. I'm not sure what to do. My mind is mush, and it has nothing to do with the alcohol. I'm at a crossroads and don't know where to go. I don't know what to say to Paul's family. How do I even begin to explain this? I keep thinking I'm having a nightmare as I sleep one off, but I'm not. I'm sitting stock still in my kitchen as the first rays of the sun turn the black sky purple. There's a vice around my heart, a profound loss for my friend, and fear for the message he left behind. I've seen the end. You don't make it. You try falling asleep after this.